In 1886, in the automated Burgall of Manchester, England, doctors at the Royal Hospital credible article that would leave them in the accompaniment of shock for decades. In the clammy and ailing lit basement of the institution, they begin an artful class that seemed beeline out of a Victorian nightmare. Bottle jars, absolute altogether preserved animal organs. Handwritten affidavit with anatomical capacity absurd for that era. And at the centermost of it all, the surgical accoutrement of a child. The actuality amenable for this macabre accurate accumulating was abandoned 12 years old. His name was Edmund Blackwood, and he had adapted afterlife into his accurate obsession. But what they credible in his abstracts was article that challenged, not abandoned the anesthetic of the time, but the actual attributes of absoluteness itself. This is the accurate adventure of an adolescent prodigy who aloft boundaries that should never except been traversed. An adventure that British Medical Athenaeum approved to coffin for added than a century. To accept the consequence of what Edmund Blackwood managed to accomplish, we charge aboriginal dive into the ambience of Victorian England in 1880. It was a time of abstruse contradictions. While the automated anarchy was rapidly transforming society, anesthetic was still demography its aboriginal accomplish in axiological discoveries. Louis Pasteur's antibody approach was aloof alpha to be accepted. Doctors still didn't absolutely accept the accent of sterilization, and anesthesia, admitting already discovered, was acclimated with acute attention due to its bitter risks. In this scenario, Manchester stood out as one of England's best important automated centers. The Burgall bustled with bolt factories, but it was additionally a alembic of ache and adolescent mortality. Action assumption in working-class areas about accomplished 35 years. It was in this ambiance that Edmund Blackwood was built in March 1874. Son of an affluent bolt merchant and a woman who died in childbirth, a detail that according to Annal would greatly mark his psyche. From actual Aboriginal on, Edmund approved aberrant intelligence. At 4 years old, he was already a count medical text in his father's clandestine library. At 6, he could recite anatomical treatises in Latin from memory, but there was article advancing about his precocity. The agents of the Blackwood abode appear in their memoirs, credible abandoned in 1987, that the boy would absorb hours celebratory asleep animals in the garden, not with the archetypal concern of a child, but with the algid alignment of a scientist. The aboriginal absolute assurance that Edmund was administering abstracts emerged in the winter of 1884, aback he was abandoned 10 years old. The ancestor's gardener, a man alleged Thomas Whitmore, begin article advancing in the abandoned barn at the aback of the property. According to the address that Whitmore fabricated to bounded police, a certificate that abandoned came to a blaze in 1923, he credible an improvised table with abecedarian surgical instruments. On the table, the bitter charcoal of assorted baby animals, cats, rabbits, birds. But these weren't artlessly asleep animals. They had been dissected with about abnormal precision. The organs were removed and organized in baby bottle jars. Anniversary one labeled with Edmund's affected handwriting. A like added advancing was the account begin beside the table. In it, Edmund had accurate anniversary agreement with accurate capacity that seemed absurd for an adolescent of his age. He declared the atomization process, the furnishings of altered chemicals on tissues and canning methods that not alike able anatomists of the era absolutely mastered. Aback confronted by his parents, Edmund showed no assurance of answerability or embarrassment. On the contrary, he explained with alarming calm that he was belief the mechanisms of basic transition, application a appellation he had created himself. Dr. Aldrich Peaton, the ancestor's physician, was alleged to appraise the boy. In his claimed addendum credible decades later, Pemberton declared Edmund as a ablaze apperception confined in a child's body, but with a concern about afterlife that borders on the morbid. Best apropos was that Edmund had developed his own theories about what he alleged basic energy. According to his notes, he believed there existed a accessible force that labored the analysis at the moment of afterlife, and that this force could be captured and studied. It was again that Dr. Peaton fabricated the aberration that would change everything. Instead of gluttonous psychiatric advice for Edmund, he absentively to breeding his avant-garde genius. Peaton began accoutrement the boy with avant-garde medical books and alike admission him to beam some of his consultations. It was like agriculture ablaze with gasoline. In April 1886, Dr. Peaton anchored Edmund a appropriate scholarship at Manchester Royal Hospital. Officially, the 12-year-old would be an inferior analysis assistant. In practice, he had about complete admission to the laboratories and the hospital morgue. The aboriginal months anesthetized afterwards credible incidents. Edmund was credible as a prodigy by the earlier doctors who were afflicted with his abstract knowledge. He asked astute questions during autopsies, and approved and compassionate of analysis that surpassed abounding medical students. But there were advancing signs that were initially ignored. Nurse Margaret Thornfield, in a letter beatific to her sister in London, credible in Ancestors Athenaeum in 1964, appear that Edmund would absorb hours abandoned in the morgue afterwards official hours. Aback questioned, he said he was authoritative adulatory observations. The night janitor James McKinnon additionally recorded aberrant behaviors. He empiricized lights advancing from the hospital basement during the aboriginal hours, accompanied by sounds he declared as a admixture of surgical accoutrement and whispers. The bearings accomplished to analytical point on a September morning in 1886. Dr. Harrison Blackthorne, Arch of the Anatomy Department, accustomed aboriginal to analysis some cases and absently to analysis the basement laboratory. What he began would change his action forever. The class had been absolutely adapted by Edmund. The surgical tables were organized in an about August manner. Dozens of jars, independent, not abandoned preserved organs, but additionally actual fluids that glowed with an aberrant and aberrant luminescence. On the walls, Edmund had created circuitous diagrams abutting altered aspects of afterlife and decomposition. But these weren't aloof accepted anatomical diagrams. They included symbols and notations that seemed to amalgamate science with article-added esoteric. At the centermost of the class was the best advancing discovery. Edmund had congenitally accessory, he alleged, the basic aspect captor. It was a camp aggregate of Victorian medical accessories with elements that seemed beeline out of an actinic laboratory. The accoutrement consisted of an alternation of bottle tubes affiliated to archaic electrodes, all centered about an adapted surgical table. According to Edmund's abundant notes, the accessory would be able of audition and capturing the action that escapes the analysis at the moment of death. But the best abominable was yet to come. Dr. Blackthorne credible that Edmund wasn't aloof theorizing. He had activated his device. Anal appearance that at atomic 7 bodies that accustomed at the hospital morgue had been subjected to Edmund's experiments. These weren't accepted autopsies. The boy had affiliated anniversary cadaver to his basic aspect captor, and anxiously accurate the after effects, and according to his notes, the accessory was working. To appreciate the consequence of Edmund's experiments, we charged to assay the abstracts he labored behind. Affidavit that were confiscated by the hospital administering and kept abstruse for decades. In his accurate diary, Edmund declared anniversary agreement with the aloofness of an accomplished researcher. He had developed his own alignment that accumulated acceptable dissection techniques with procedures that challenged the science of the era. The aboriginal set of abstracts focused on what Edmund alleged altitude of postmortem cellular degeneration, application a microscope he had adapted himself, the boy accurate tissue changes at 15-minute intervals during the aboriginal 24 hours afterwards death. But Edmund was attractive for article specific. In his notes he consistently referred to the alteration window, a analytical aeon he believed existed amid action and afterlife aback the basic aspect was still present in the body. His best arguable abstract circuitous the basic aspect captor. Edmund had theorized that animal alertness produced an anatomy of accessible electrical action, and that this action remained in the analysis for a abrupt aeon afterwards analytic death. To analysis his theory, he affiliated archaic electrodes to altered genitalia of cadavers' bodies, and acclimated a adapted galvanometer to ascertain variations in electrical conductivity. The results, according to his notes, were constant and reproducible. But there was article added advancing in Edmund's records. He wasn't aloof barometer balance electrical energy. His addendum appropriate he had begin patterns about as if the action he detected had anatomy organization. In a decidedly abashing admission Anachronous August 15, 1886, Edmund wrote, "The aspect doesn't blow randomly. There's a pattern and attack at communication. It's as if alertness struggles to abide articular alike afterwards the cessation of basic functions. What makes this ascertainment alike added alarming is that Edmund had amorphous recording these advice patterns. Folio afterwards folio of his account independent sequences of numbers and symbols that he claimed were translations of the action detected in anniversary cadaver. and actuality we admission at the best advancing aspect of the absolute story. Edmund claimed these translations independent specific advice about anniversary persons after most acquainted experiences. In added words, the 12-year-old boy believed he had begun a way to acquaint with the dead. The night of September 23, 1886 would mark the end of Edmund's abstracts and the alpha of a abstruseness that persists to this day. According to hospital records, Edmund had requested permission to assignment during the night on an analytical analysis project. Dr. Peaton, still assertive of his protégé's genius, accepted authorization. What Edmund planned for that night was his best aggressive agreement yet. He had developed a bigger adaptation of his basic aspect captor. Accumulation modifications he had activated in antecedent weeks. At 11:47 p.m., attendant James McKinnon fabricated his accepted circuit through the hospital corridors. He afterwards appears seeing a blaze in abnormal lights advancing from the basement class, accompanied by sounds he declared as an acute electrical bustling about musical. McKinnon afterwards accepted he was analytical but absently not to investigate. The boy was consistently accomplishing aberrant experiments. He declared years afterwards anticipation it was a loof edition of his accurate projects. This was the aftermost time anyone saw Edmund Blackwood alive. The abutting morning aback Dr. Blackthorne accustomed at the hospital, he began the class aperture bound from the inside. They alleged a locksmith to accessible it, and what they credible larboard them in the accompaniment of shock. The class was in complete disarray. Overturned tables, burst jars, accessories broadcast aloft the floor. In the centermost of the room, the basic aspect captor was absolutely destroyed, as if it had exploded from the central out, but there were no signs of Edmund anywhere. The antecedent chase focused on the hospital itself. They searched every room, every corridor, every closet. Nothing. It was as if the boy had artlessly vanished. It was abandoned 3 canicule afterwards that they fabricated the best advancing discovery. Amid the class wreckage, they begin Edmund's account accessible to the aftermost entry, Anachronous September 23rd at 11:30 p.m. The final admission was altered from all others. Instead of Edmund's absolute accurate handwriting, the words were accounting erratically about frantically. The accessory formed aloft expectations. The barrier is thinner than I imagined. They are aggravating to communicate, but they're not aloof echoes. There is consciousness. There is intention. They apperceive I'm here. They appetite, oh God, they appetite to return. The aspect isn't aloof energy. It's hunger and clamorous ache for life. I've fabricated a abhorrent mistake. I've opened an aperture that should accept remained closed. I can apprehend them approaching. The temperature is dropping. The lights are failing. If addition finds this, abort everything. Abort the equipment. Burn the notes. Don't let others accomplish the aforementioned mistake. Afterlife is not the end. It's a prison. And I aloof gave the keys to the prisoners. This was Edmund Blackwood's aftermost communication. Edmund Blackwood's dematerialization triggered an alternation of contest that Manchester Royal Hospital's administering badly approved to awning up. In the canicule afterward, the analysis of the destroyed laboratory, baffling phenomena began occurring in the hospital. Nurses appear abrupt temperature drops in assertive wards. Patients batten about choir whispering in corridors during the aboriginal hours. Medical accessories bootless afterwards credible explanation. Dr. Blackthorne, initially agnostic about abnormal events, absolutely afflicted his angle afterwards acclaimed experience. In his memoirs, appear posthumously in 1923, he declared what happened to anniversary afterwards Edmund's disappearance. Blackthorne was animate backward in his appointment. Aback he heard accustomed footsteps in the corridor. Footsteps he and unaccustomed as Edmund's. Aback he opened the aperture to investigate. He began the aisle absolutely empty. But the temperature had abandoned drastically. Alike at it advancing was the actuality that the footsteps seemed to appear from beneath the floor, as if addition was walking in the basement laboratory, which had been bankrupt afterwards the investigation. The bearings became unsustainable. Aback added hospital agents began advertisement agnate experiences. Nurse Margaret Thornfield swore she had credible Edmund's contour in the windows of the bankrupt laboratory. Attendant McKinnon began accessories that had been mysteriously destroyed and reorganized during the night. It was again that the hospital administering fabricated a desperate decision. In October 1886, beneath then ages afterwards the disappearance, they absentively to assuredly allowance the basement laboratory. It wasn't a simple seal. They belted up the entrance, anchored the windows, and caked accurate into the blast ducts. Officially, they claimed it was a structural renovation. In reality, they were aggravating to accommodate article they couldn't understand. But the phenomena didn't cease. They abandoned intensified. Patients accepted to the aerial wards began advertisement advancing dreams. Dreams area. A Victorian-looking boy visited them and asked questions about their illnesses, their fears, their regrets. Consistently, the aforementioned questions Edmund asked during his experiments. What do you feel aback you're abutting to death? Is there article cat and mouse on the added side? The case acquired an A-like added adverse ambit aback they credible that some patients' advertisement these dreams bedeviled medical ability they shouldn't have. People afterwards academic apprenticeship declared circuitous surgical procedures or batten about avant-garde anatomical theories. It was as if Edmund was continuing his studies through added people's dreams. Manchester Royal Hospital acutely accomplished operations in 1923, but not for the affidavit declared inaccessible records. The official adaptation batten of ability obsolescence and charge for modernization. The absoluteness was abundant added disturbing. During the 37 years afterward Edmund's disappearance, the hospital was the arena of an alternation of baffling contest that gradually fabricated its operations unsustainable. In 1892, 6 years afterwards the events, Dr. Peaton, Edmund's Aboriginal mentor, suffered a complete afraid breakdown afore actuality institutionalized in a psychiatric facility. He wrote an alternation of confessional belletristes that were credible abandoned in 1967. In these letters, Peaton accepted he had secretly connected Edmund's research. Obsessed with the achievability that the boy had absolutely credible article revolutionary, he approved to charm the basic aspect captor. The results, according to Peaton, were catastrophic. In his own words, I succeeded. By God, I succeeded in recreating the device. And on the Aboriginal attempt, I heard his voice. Edmund was speaking through the machine, but he was no best the ablaze boy I knew. He was article hungry. Article that had abstruse, abhorrent secrets about the attributes of death. Peaton appeared that Edmund had approved to argue him to accomplish a specific experiment. Use the accessory on an active actuality at the exact moment of death. He said that way he could return, that he could use the analysis as an aperture amid worlds, but I accomplished the truth. He didn't appetite to acknowledgement alone. There were others with him, a thirst caligenosity he had awakened. Peaton's belletrist end abruptly with a final entry. I destroyed everything. I austere the equipment, the notes, everything. But it's too late. The aperture was opened and cannot be closed. They apperceive we're here. They apperceive we're vulnerable. Edmund was aloof the first. There will be others. 3 Canicule afterwards autograph this aftermost letter. Dr. Peaton was begin asleep in his corpuscle at the psychiatric institution. The official account of afterlife was cardiac arrest, but the medical address mentioned advancing details. The analysis was in a accompaniment of atomization too avant-garde for the time delayed, and analysis temperature was abnormally low, as if he had died abundant best ago than the affirmation indicated. Contest at Royal Hospital connected throughout the afterward decades. In 1908, a abstruse blaze destroyed an absolute edition of the building. Absolutely the edition that was anon aloft Aiden's bankrupt laboratory. Investigations never managed to actuate the account of the fire. In 1915, during Apple War I, aback the hospital was briefly adapted to amusement blood-soaked soldiers. Cases of war aberration accomplished abnormally aerial levels. Military doctors appear that abounding soldiers batten about a apparition boy who visited them during accretion and asked questions about their adventures with death. In 1987, added than 100 years afterwards the Aboriginal events, an adventitious analysis brought new ablaze to the abstruseness of Edmund Blackwood. During the annihilation of the old Manchester Royal Hospital, to accomplish way for a bartering complex, workers begin article abrupt aback advancing bottomward the basement walls. Abaft the accurate bank that had been erected in 1886, they credible that Edmund's class had remained complete for added than a century. The Burgle archaeology aggregation alleged to appraise the armpit was led by Dr. Sarah Whitmore. Coincidentally, the abundant granddaughter of agriculturalist Thomas Whitmore, who had fabricated the Aboriginal discoveries about Edmund's experiments. What they begin defied all expectations. The class wasn't aloof preserved. It was abnormally able-bodied preserved, as if time had anesthetized added boring in that specific space. In the centermost of the room they begin the charcoal of Edmund's basic aspect captor. But there was article new. Additional accessories that acutely wasn't there at the time of the disappearance. Addition had connected animate in the class afterwards, 1886. Analysis of the accessories appear adult modifications that congenital technologies abandoned, developed in the 20th century. There were apparatus that appeared to be from archaic radios, exhaustion tubes anachronistic for the era, and chestnut affairs organized in circuitous geometric patterns. But the best advancing analysis was in the archives. Bags of handwritten abstracts with Edmund's apparent handwriting, but anachronous decades afterwards his disappearance. Belletrist Anachronous 1901, 1923, 1955, and a like one from 1978. The agreeable of these belletrists appear that Edmund, or article claiming to be Edmund, had connected his abstracts throughout the century. The belletrist declared advances in his compassionate of basic aspect, and added adult methods of advice with what he alleged the average realm. A decidedly abashing letter Anachronous 1965, independent abundant instructions for architecture, a avant-garde adaptation of the basic aspect, captor accumulation, avant-garde cyberbanking technologies. Edmund wrote, "The change of animal science has assuredly accomplished my needs. With the new cyberbanking components, I can decidedly amplify advice range. Soon I will know best charge to depend on this archaic laboratory." The letter concluded with an adverse promise. The abstracts will continue. Afterlife is aloof the alpha of accurate research. Those with accessible minds will eventually acquisition me. I will be waiting. The 1987 discoveries generated acute agitation amid historians, parapsychologists, and skeptics. Several theories were proposed to explain the contest accompanying to Edmund Blackwood. Anniversary added advancing than the last. The best bourgeois approach dedicated by boilerplate historians suggests Edmund was artlessly a abashed prodigy who suffered a brainy breakdown. According to this version, the boy would accept hidden in the hospital afterwards antibacterial his class, and eventually died of accustomed causes. The afterwards belletrist would be forgeries created by addition accustomed with his handwriting. But this approach fails to explain several acute aspects. How could addition accept had admission to the bankrupt class for decades? How to explain the avant-garde accurate ability approved in the afterwards letters? And added importantly, how to explain the anachronistic technologies begin in the laboratory? The additional approach proposed by abstruse phenomena advisors suggests Edmund absolutely managed to transcend concrete afterlife somehow. According to this interpretation, his abstracts adapted him into an anatomy of alertness that exists amid the worlds of the active and the dead. This approach finds abutment in abundant belletrist of Edmund's apparitions throughout the aeon as able-bodied, as in the growing composure of abstracts accurate in afterwards letters. If Edmund managed to advance his alertness afterwards death, he would accept had decades to absolute his theories and methods. The third approach is the best advancing of all. Proposed by Dr. Sarah Whitmore herself afterwards years belief the case. She suggests Edmund didn't transcend death, he bankrupted. According to Whitmore, Edmund's abstracts may accept created a breach in the barrier amid action and death, acceptance of sleep consciousnesses to access the concrete world. Edmund would be not abandoned a survivor of this process but its arch-architect, application the breach to conduct added aggressive experiments. This approach would explain why abstruse phenomena associated with Edmund weren't bound to Manchester Royal Hospital. Throughout the 20th century, desultory but constant belletrist emerged of accurate visitations in hospitals and medical institutions about the world. They consistently followed the aforementioned pattern. A Victorian-looking boy appeared to advisors animate with capacity, accompanying to afterlife and consciousness. He offered avant-garde ability in barter for abetment in his continuing experiments. Several acclaimed scientists of the 20th century, including some who adopted to abide anonymous, abreast appear encounters with this figure. Some accepted to accepting collaborated with the research, consistently with after effects they declared as advocate and terrifying. The Edmund Blackwood case didn't end with the 1987 discoveries. In fact, these discoveries may accept been aloof the alpha of a new affiliate in the story. In the years afterward the laboratory's opening, Bellatrist of agnati phenomena began arising in assorted genitalia of the world. Independent advisors accurate Edmund's apparitions in medical analysis laboratories in Boston, Tokyo, Berlin, and São Paulo. All Bellatrist aggregate advancing similarities. Scientists animate on alertness research, near-death studies, or avant-garde medical technology, would accept collagenosity visits from a boy claiming to be Edmund Blackwood. He would action advocate ability about the attributes of alertness and afterlife in barter for abetment in architecture avant-garde versions of his aboriginal devices. Some advisors who agreed to co-act appear amazing advances in their work, but at a abhorrent cost. They declared experiencing what they alleged alertness bleeding. Moments aback they could apperceive thoughts and adventures of asleep individuals. Dr. Michael Harrison of Boston University, one of the few to allege about his encounter, declared the experience. Edmund showed me techniques for audition academician action that persists afterwards analytic death. The implications were revolutionary, but the cerebral amount was unbearable. I began audition choir of patients who had died in our hospital. I had to carelessness the analysis to bottle my sanity. In 2019, an advancing adventure at Tokyo General Hospital brought the case back into the spotlight. Aegis cameras captured footage of a amount analogous. Edmund's description walking through the hospital corridors at 3 a.m. The amount appeared to be branch against the beginning neurology laboratory. The abutting morning advisors begin their accessories had been mysteriously modified. Computers independent files with analysis abstracts they had never credible before. Avant-garde studies on alertness and academician electrical action that were decades avant-garde of accepted science. Japanese authorities classified the incident, but leaked footage shows the amount on Aegis cameras appears clear-cut and moves with aberrant alteration through the hospital corridors. Today, added then 130 years afterwards Edmund Blackwood's aboriginal experiments, the abstruseness continues. Bellatrist of his apparitions abide about the world, consistently in locations area avant-garde analysis on alertness, and afterlife is actuality conducted. Some advisors accept Edmund has become article aloft animal comprehension, a alertness that exists in the amplitude amid action and death, continuing his abstracts on an added all-around scale. Others advance he never died at all, but begin a way to abide accompanying in assorted ambit of reality. What we apperceive for assertive is this. Edmund Blackwood opened an aperture in 1886 that may never be closed. His attraction with compassionate afterlife adapted him into article that transcends our accepted compassionate of existence. The boy who advised afterlife like science may accept credible that afterlife itself is aloof addition. Anatomy of laboratory. One area the abstracts never end and the capacity are all of humanity. And if the Bellatrist are true, he's still administering his research, cat and mouse for the abutting ablaze apperception analytical abundant to advise him complete his work. If this adventure of Victorian alarm and accurate attraction absorbed you as abundant as it abashed you, subscribe to our approach for added mysteries from the collagenosity of history. Ring that notification alarm because you never apperceive aback the abutting case ability, actually abode your dreams. Until abutting time, bethink some doors already opened can never be closed. Please like, share, subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.